Hi guys, just before we start the episode today, whatever platform you are listening to this on, whether it be on the podcast, Apple Podcast, YouTube, whatever it is, please support it. Please like, subscribe, whatever you can do. Want to reach as many people as possible. So please do that and we'll get right into the episode. Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback podcast. Today, I am dealing with a very bad cough. So if you hear me coughing at some point throughout this episode, you will know why. So apologies. But in this episode today, we have Phoebe Lapine. Phoebe is a constant source of positivity, information, and inspiration online through her Instagram and her own website, Feed Me Phoebe. Great name, by the way, where she offers a whole range of resources to help people recover their health. This information and knowledge she regularly puts out there is largely fueled by her own health struggles, having been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease in her early 20s, forcing her into action to reclaim her own health. And this is the story she is here today to tell. Thank you so much for coming on, Phoebe. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great.
Cool. Well, should we get into it then? What I'd like to do is, I alluded to, and I've obviously read online and done some research about your story, but that I'm sure that only kind of scratches the surface of actually what happened. So, could you take us back before you had any like major health issues, and what was life like before then? Were you healthy? And could you take us through that initial part of the story?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say in my adolescence and teen years, I had a stomach of steel. I loved traveling, I loved eating, and was had a very adventurous spirit, had no issues on that front. I would say, as many young women do, I definitely had some like early hormonal fluctuations. My period was irregular, my skin was, kind of struggling in its own way. And so, like so many women around my age, I think around at 16, I was prescribed birth control just to, get my period on track. And that I believe, kind of band-aided maybe some potential issues that were starting to manifest. But again, hindsight 2020. So I just, lived it up in college. I'd say probably added a lot of Tinder to the box that could eventually, all come together into the perfect storm that is autoimmune disease. I definitely partied hard and ate a lot of pizza and chicken fingers and other super healthy things. And then, a year after graduation, after graduation, I went on a trip with my mother to Morocco. And, again, ate my way through there, but developed a really bad case of food poisoning. And I would say, like, from that point on, my stomach was never the same. And about a year later, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune disease that affects the thyroid gland. And it was very lucky that I got diagnosed at all because so many women, and it does primarily affect women, do not. A lot of doctors don't kind of check for the antibodies that would confirm kind of the autoimmune variety of hypothyroidism. But my just, regular childhood doctor did. And she said it was no big deal. It was really common. All I need to do was, take this pill for the rest of my life and I'd be fine. And I, actually was raised by a mother who was fairly health conscious, who did a lot of like homeopathic remedies. And, even though I was like on the pill and had taken, plenty of antibiotics in my lifetime, for whatever reason, I was like, well, that doesn't sound like a great plan to me. So I just left the office and went on living my life. And I think that's because minus, the kind of gut stuff that cropped up every once in a while, I didn't have that many symptoms. And it also wasn't really explained to me kind of what the thyroid did, what an autoimmune disease was, and kind of what I should be looking out for. And I'd say that, slowly but surely in the years that followed, I kind of wound my way down health mountain and started to experience, without even knowing, like some of those typical Hashimoto symptoms. So crushing fatigue would be number one, but there's always rationalizations for these things. I was like, oh, I'm in my early 20s. I had just quit my corporate job to try and be a chef and caterer full time, working in the food world. And that was really exhausting work. I was also, kind of doubled over in pain every time I would eat. And eventually I just stopped exercising because I'd get such bad cramps. My skin continued to be a mess, which was, one of the big things that got me to finally start paying attention. I had really bad insomnia, despite, being exhausted all the time, just clearly a mess. And so, yeah, eventually I ended up, seeking out a more holistic doctor that luckily, my mom turned me onto. And he was the first one to suggest doing some sort of elimination diet to see if it was something diet related. First person to do like full on blood work for food sensitivities, but then also for like all sorts of other autoimmune issues, since, these things can go hand in hand. And so one of the first changes I made was just take gluten out, which is kind of problematic for a lot of people with Hashimoto's. And it was amazing. I couldn't believe the kind of night and day effect it had on me. But, being a chef, it was also really challenging and left me feeling very sad and like rebellious in a way, I think, because I didn't fully understand what it was doing to my body. So that was kind of like led me to chapter 2, but I'll take a break in case you have any other specific questions.
Oh yeah. First of all, I think it's really interesting that when you hear like young people, it's the thing that like where there's something like visually wrong with them, that then they'll go and seek it out, like it's the skin and weight gain or something like that. It's it's not the feeling bad that's that you'll go and you'll go and seek something out. But it definitely resonates a lot with me, like being at a young age and kind of and it sounded like you were just like, well, screw that, I don't believe that this is an issue for me. I'm going to go and live my life. Was it kind of that way?
Yeah. I mean, I like my book, The Wellness Project. I talk about this concept of healthy hedonism. And it was something kind of in like the chapter 2, like once I turned to holistic medicine, that I really struggled with. I felt like Western medicine, had so little to offer in terms of, food as medicine and the holistic side of things. But then when you turn to functional medicine, kind of like the flip side of that coin was just this really overwhelming laundry list that was not totally doable for someone who's like young on a budget with like limited time, money, and energy. And yeah, it just didn't seem like there was any in between. So kind of my barometer is something I call healthy hedonism, which is just like trying to figure out how to balance the things that on paper, make you feel well or are quote unquote healthy, with the things that actually feed your spirit, because I think that it always has to be a balance. And certainly in my early 20s, mid 20s, the scales leaned more on the hedonism than the health. But as I've gotten older, that definition, that balance has just, been redefined.
But I think so. I think it's actually, in a way, is healthier to, well, not healthier, but mentally healthier to go that way than the other way, which I know a lot of people probably do go, where they completely freak out.
Yeah.
You've been told by a doctor you've got to take a pill every day for the rest of your life. You're like, and that's like medical trauma that people get.
Yeah.
And was there none of that for you then? Was there none of it like, I've got an autoimmune issue, that means I have this for life? And was there none of those worries there?
Oh, there definitely was. I mean, I remember getting the diagnosis and like crying hysterically to one of my girlfriends. But then, young person power of denial, I just was like, blinders, like, nope, carry on. And yeah, I didn't have the curiosity at the time, or rather, I probably just like didn't want to know, like,
Mhm.
really what it would entail or what it meant. It just sounded bad.
And just to clarify, the part of the story until you got to the point where you were seeing this new doctor, how long was that until it got to the point where it was like actually quite bad, you need to go and see someone?
I want to say 3 years. Yeah. Some like around 3 years. I was
Okay.
diagnosed with 22, and then I think I started to get my act together in my mid 20s.
And what were the worst symptoms for you at that time? I know you mentioned a few of them, but
Yeah, I mean, the gut stuff for sure. I actually, the fatigue and weight gain are kind of the two hallmarks of
mm,
Hashimoto's. And I didn't have weight gain, I think, because my gut was such a mess. I wasn't absorbing any nutrients. So, it was unfortunately, like, as a woman, I was like, oh, well, that's a perk. Like, I am eating whatever I want. I'm miserable all the time, but I'm eating whatever I want. I'm not exercising, and like I'm losing weight. So, but no, eventually I was like, okay, this is not healthy.
but that as a 25-year-old, like social, because I mean, I find I'm in my 30s, and I find it difficult now when, I get this look from my friends, and it was even someone who I wasn't expecting it the other day, and they were just like, oh, what is it? What weird diet are you on at the moment?
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, you're like, I know they don't mean it, don't mean anything bad by it, but it does kind of like separate yourself from like normal
Yeah.
society. Did you feel that? And at that, and then was that a big thing for you?
Totally. And I think because of my occupation, I was also just really afraid. I was like trying to make it in an industry where, dietary restrictions or specialty diets were not like a mainstream thing yet. Like even gluten free, over 10 years ago was like not
Yeah.
something that people really knew about. And yeah, I was just worried, obviously, that would like take me out of jobs, take me out of work. And yeah, I couldn't really afford to like be that picky at that point.
Mm.
So yeah, I was worried about that. And then, yeah, I always worried about being quote unquote like that girl at the dinner table, like ordering like steamed vegetables. And yeah, really didn't want to be that girl.
And so you went to, like, would you see yourself as quite like what made you go down more of the I guess non-medical routes? Because I think a lot of people with chronic illness, me included, like waste time going down that traditional medical route for quite a
Yeah.
while, because that's the way we've been raised. It sounds like obviously with your mum that was like really helpful. Was she the main driver there, or what kind of made you go down more of that route?
Yeah, I'd say she was definitely the main driver just because I was raised, kind of understanding there were different modalities. I kind of found my way to an acupuncturist who I really liked, and she ended up kind of becoming my like rock, my like home base of all of my doctors. And I've tried, a ton of different doctors, including, within the holistic realm, naturopaths, functional medicine doctors, like holistic endocrinologists, like a lot. I bounced around to a lot of different people.
Mm.
Um, but she, was kind of someone who really resonated with me. She is like, a potty mouth and is just like cool and, kind of really understands the healthy hedonism stuff. So her approach resonated with me. But it's interesting, I do this online coaching program, and I had like a call with my folks last night, and I had someone from Belgium in it who's living in the US right now, and she said she's been dealing with SIBO and Hashimoto's. She was like, in Europe they just don't like, we just don't think to kind of look beyond the establishment in the
Yeah.
way that people in the US do. So I actually had never really heard that perspective. It didn't occur to me that was something that was maybe unique to those of us in the States. But I also think that, our medical establishment is so odd, so little safety net, like there's so little government regulation on chemicals and environmental issues and no national health care, that like maybe as a result, all of us are just on the internet and on social media just trying to throw a bunch of darts at the wall and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, there's definitely positives and negatives of both. I think when you've got a chronic illness, like being in the US, not for the environment, but for definitely the level of
Yeah.
doctors, the
Once you're
level,
sick. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it might get you sick, but
Exactly.
but once you're actually there, yeah, because I mean, all the experts and everything seem to be in the US. So I mean, that is definitely useful. So you mentioned, could you take us through the next part of the story then? So with
Yeah.
with this new doctor you saw resonated with you, could you take us through that part of the story, and what was it you specifically were doing to help you in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I went from him, I went to this holistic endocrinologist who was like really militaristic and strict. And yeah, I just found myself getting really overwhelmed and feeling like I was not really heeding my social wellness, my financial wellness, and just feeling like something's got to give. There has to be kind of some sort of middle ground. I was getting very overwhelmed by the to-do list. And just also like all the reading online and all the things to be scared of, all the things I need to do, to try and get better. And, I think I just didn't realize at the time, that it doesn't have to be all of the above all at once. And there's so many different modalities and tactics that, you can kind of pick and choose what works for you. And that was kind of my next chapter of sorts, was living through this project that I wrote about in my book, The Wellness Project, of just taking like kind of a little bit more of an anal approach, and month by month really focusing on one problem area and a few things that I could do, like baby steps, to try and get better, and to see if those things, A, like really worked physically, and then B, like kind of what impact again they had on all of these other areas of my wellness, the financial, the social, and whether or not I actually enjoyed them. Because there's so many self-care practices, as I mentioned. I do think that we can find that happy medium of something that we both enjoy and something that moves the needle.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's something that I struggle with a lot. I'm quite, and I think this is probably something that a lot of people with chronic illness get there, maybe like achiever type. So they
Yeah.
tend to like beat themselves up when they're not doing well at something. And
Yeah.
even worse, they give themselves far too much to do. And then when they don't do it, they beat themselves up, and it's a little bit of a vicious cycle. Is
Yeah.
that, did you struggle with that at all? Like giving yourself,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah. And just like having a restrictive diet in general. Again, like it was not easy for me with work. And like it was just sad because I love food and, really fancied myself an omnivore. But the project really did, kind of achieve both goals. Like I was much better on paper by the end of it. Like my blood work was much better, both in terms of all the thyroid stuff, but then also like I was just like deficient in like every single nutrient before that. And, that got better. But then also I just felt like I had like gotten over the mental monkeying of it all. I was like, okay, like here's the list of tools at my disposal that I like, that work for me. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to do all of these every single day, but these are what I can reach to in the moment, depending on how I'm feeling and what I need.
It sounds like you're very much the type of person that would apply the 80-20 rule like
Oh
as
yeah,
much as you can. Yeah. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. Okay. And so what was it specifically? We've had a few people, like I really like to focus on mindset as much as possible with these stories. Just because what works for you won't necessarily work for someone else. However, we have had a few people recently, wanted to understand a little bit more of the specifics of really what helped you. Could you just give us a little bit of detail of what do you feel move the needle the most for you?
Yeah. So the first month I took out caffeine, alcohol, and sugar, which was like very, very difficult for me at the time. And I have to say though, like the results were mind blowing. It was night and day. I had, again, this like rash on my face called perioral dermatitis that had been like recurring for 10 years. And finally, literally 3 weeks into just taking out those three things, it was better and it's never come back. It
Wow.
was nuts. I think just my liver needed a rest. And we kind of, especially at the time, we're so marketed all these juice cleanses and all these protocols. And in reality, like when it comes to your liver, like you kind of just need to get out of your own way for a little bit. And that was all it took. And so that's something that I always preach to people is like, start there, start for a week, even 5 days. You will see a huge improvement. Some people will see a huge improvement. And those are the things that I fall back on when I'm feeling run down and, really need kind of a reset. I just do my vice detox, as I call it. And then, there were just some one-time changes that I thought were really helpful. Cause again, like if it's just a one-time change, you can avoid the mental monkeying. You never have to think about it again. So I found that like switching all of my makeup and beauty products and personal care products, cleaning products to naturals was great. Now I just like, buy those brands, don't buy the old brands. And by that same token, just putting a good filter on my tap to make sure
Mm.
that I had filtered water was a big thing. And, you know, those are harder because they're more cerebral. You don't just like wake up the next morning like you do with the Vice Detox and like be like, oh my God, I feel so much better. But, you know, I know that all of that stuff adds up. And for someone with chronic illness, it's all about kind of like paring down that toxic burden. So those were high on my list. And then I just think people really underestimate the mental side of things. And so, like, meditation, really just like all these kind of self care practices that felt like soothing to my nervous system. Um, were hugely important. And I feel like I'm much better now at just recognizing like when symptoms crop up, whether there is a result of stress and anxiety. And unfortunately, you know, there's not a quick fix for that. But I think it's important and helpful to at least just acknowledge the root cause. And you know, it's never one thing for everyone. I like to think of, you know, stress and anxiety as just like kind of heightening whatever maybe underlying issue there may have been in the first place. Like, even if it's, you know, eating a meal that didn't agree with you, like if there's stress and anxiety layered on top of that, like you're going to feel the symptoms worse.
Yeah. Do you think so like we spoke before the episode started about my own issues with like mold and stuff like that, and I know and I'm looking quite heavily into like brain retraining and
Yeah.
DNRS and stuff like that, you know, because I know from my symptoms as well that my nervous system is almost constantly in fight or flight. Do you feel like it was I don't know if that's the same kind of thing with Hashimoto's, and because you mentioned stress, then was it a case of you needed to calm your nervous system down?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm definitely a nervous system person. I will say, like, even after the wellness project, you know, I would talk about the perfectionist mindset. Like, I would love to say, like, oh yeah, like I reversed my Hashimoto's, like I'm great now. But no, the truth is that like my antibodies are still, you know, an unpredictable thing, and they're unpredictable not because if there's anything I'm doing wrong day in and day out. It's just a nervous system thing, and you know, I can get better and I can work on that side of my game, of my mental game, and you know, to make sure that, you know, I'm doing what I need to do to center myself every day. But like life just gets in the way sometimes. And I know a lot of people who with Hashimoto's, because there's a specific number to track, who can get really stressed out, who can let that in and of itself be another form of stress. And I've certainly been there, and I've just like completely left myself off the hook with that. You know, I'm doing the best I can. And, you know, as much as like we're trained to just like keep digging, like there must be some sort of, you know, like root cause of like why the antibodies won't get fully back to zero. And no, you know, and I say this to a lot of people, a lot of my clients too. It's like, I think that's a really unhealthy expectation, this idea of reversing your chronic illness. It may be hopeful to some people, but it's not, I don't know. I don't think it's realistic for the majority of people. And because of that, I don't think it necessarily needs to be the goal. Talk about 80/20. Like, I think just an 80% improvement in in your symptoms, feeling 80% is a huge win, especially with chronic illness.
Well, I guess also like a lot of like, you know, in quotes, like normal people are like feel, you know, a lot of symptoms on a daily basis, but they don't, because it's not necessarily chronic, they will live with that. And so I guess
Yeah.
if you that's probably what you're saying, really. Like a lot of people, it's very rare that someone will be sitting there with no pain, no
Yeah.
fatigue, and no like gut issues at all. So yeah, with your diet, then
Yeah.
what were the key changes you made to your diet other than gluten? Were there anything else like major that you did?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to just eat a quote unquote anti-inflammatory diet. And, you know, luckily, because I cook for myself, you know, I do eat tons of different vegetables. I have a lot of variety and diversity, which I think is so important. I tried at the time to like eat a good gut diet and really double down on like the fermented foods. But today, yeah, gluten is really just the one hard and fast rule. I don't eat a ton of dairy, but honestly, it doesn't really bother me that much. And I try not to eat, like a ton of sugar. I don't really drink caffeine still. Maybe a little green tea every once in a while, but I try and, remain caffeine free, because I know once I'm over the hump that I feel so much better. I feel so much more energized and I sleep so much better. But yeah, those are kind of the biggies. I don't eat a ton of corn and soy, but again, like I think it's important to identify what your hard lines are and where there can be wiggle room. And for me, like that's the gluten, that's the hard line. And then everything else, I try and just live my life and not stress too much.
And so, how you feel today compared to, I guess, your lowest point? Like, how much better do you feel on mentally and physically?
Yeah, I mean, so much better. It's funny. It's like, cause back to like the 80%, I can't remember what 100% was, but as you said, it's like, maybe I never really felt 100%. I
Yeah.
don't even know what 100% was. But I really can't really remember like my rock bottom either, in a good way. It's just been so long. Um, but yeah, I mean, I have my moments and my flare-ups, and of course, like there are days and weeks when I like don't take care of myself as well as others. And that's okay. I know what I need to do to bounce back, and I still have gut stuff occasionally. Um, have imperfect night's sleep occasionally. I feel like it's all just part of being a sensitive creature in this world.
I love the fact that you have such a, well, it's refreshing to hear such like a balanced view on things and just like to live your life. And I think the whole like going quite extreme at things, which I tend to do, it plays into that mindset of like my life needs to be on hold before I can enjoy it again. And
Yeah.
I was that something you were trying to do as you were doing all of these things? Were you trying to live your life at the same time and actually still have a life and enjoy your life?
Yeah, I mean, that was always the goal for
Yeah.
sure. And then, I dealt with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, after the wellness project, after I got the Hashimoto's under control, which I think was a direct result of stress. And that was like a whole other deep dive and a whole other kind of like set of restrictive changes. And it's funny, like I wrote a book about that came out this year, and the diet that's kind of most commonly associated with it is the low FODMAP diet, which is like really, gosh, it's like a chopped mystery box of a diet. It's like such a weird list of foods. Um, but even, when I've had to do more restrictive things like that was one that was like really hard to have a social life on, because it's impossible to eat out at a restaurant and not have garlic and onion. But even on that, I really always tried to like find, especially in the kitchen, like kind of that silver lining, just like try new things and diversify as much as possible. And, one of the best pieces of feedback that I get all the time, it was like funny because I was really worried it was going to be the opposite, but people buy my book and they immediately like start to open up their diet versus get more restrictive, which is ironic for a book that like follows a very restrictive diet. And I always hear from people, like I didn't think that I could eat any of these things and not feel symptoms, and like I feel fine. So I think, I don't know. I mean, of course, my work attracts a certain audience, but I do think that we've gone a little bit too far in the holistic side of things, and that there are a lot of people out there who need to be like reined back towards neutral, towards the center, towards opening their world back up versus, um, constantly, shutting things out, eliminating things.
Yeah, it's almost like someone who's doing something so rigidly 100% of the time, but like stressed about it, compared to someone who's doing it 70% of the time and is, being very relaxed about it. Probably the person who's being 70% of it is, well, they're probably enjoying their life a lot more, but they're probably feeling
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, for sure.
So could you tell us a little bit about the mindset side of things, like going through this, like at your like, I know you said you can't remember your kind of rock bottom or darkest times, but I'm sure you can kind of remember like how it felt. Like what were you going through then, and what were the tools like you used, and like how did you keep yourself going in those times?
Oh man. I mean, gosh, in the dark times. I don't know that I did. I just, I don't know that I was very graceful at it, like until I kind of reached my like come to Jesus moment, like turning point. I mean, I just tried to like ignore things as much as possible and to double down on the hedonism and keep going on that front. And then I think once I started to like hit rock bottom and change direction, then it was like kind of the opposite. I did really struggle with the mental side of feeling overwhelmed and overly obsessive and like having just my mind way too occupied by like these health choices I was making day in and day out, or more importantly, when I was straying, when I wasn't, doing something virtuous. So yeah, I mean, I guess like kind of the way I dealt with it mentally was like to design this project to, kind of give myself this mission statement of having more freedom, or of making, kind of these short-term changes one at a time with awareness, so that by the end of it, I could let myself off the hook, and, find that elusive balance.
Do you think that's a way of like, for me, what really helps me is just like actually moving forwards with, and just do it knowing that I'm doing something that is contributing to my health. If I'm just stuck still, not knowing what to do, like mentally, I find that
Yeah.
quite difficult. Would you say that was helpful? You had that
Absolutely.
project?
Yes. It was about choosing baby steps and doing them
Yeah.
one at a time. I feel
Mm.
like so many of us, just see like, oh my gosh, I need to be doing X, Y, and Z. And when you just dive into it and start trying to overhaul things, overnight, turning your life upside down, like it doesn't always work. And more importantly, you never know what's actually moving the needle because you're just, convoluting it all by adding it all together. So yeah, that was a really big game changer for me and helped me feel a lot more calm. And yeah, I think the awareness thing was really, really key. Again, like in my program, I talked to a lot of people who have jumped on to some of the fads like Whole30 and or some sort of elimination diet. And I tell you, I'd say like maybe 10% of those people even like did the reintroduction at all. Like most people just like either fell off the train somewhere in the middle or were just like, oh, I did it. And like didn't even get the information because, there wasn't the focus on reintroducing and actually like learning something to move forward. And, feeling a lot of guilt afterwards of like why they couldn't, keep up some of those changes. Cause a lot of them did feel better, but they just never knew why.
Mm. Did you feel like I think we talked about it earlier, like the social side of things, but like did you feel like any of this like affected any sort of relationships you had in your life? Was it difficult for people to understand? Like, could you give us some detail on that?
Yeah, I mean, I met my husband when I was just making some of these changes and like really struggling with the balance of it all. And so I had like both some like really embarrassing moments of like health crises like in his presence, but then also just like felt like he had met me under false pretenses of like being a really fun person who could like go out to dinner and eat
Yeah.
everything and drink everything, when in reality I was like trying to make some changes for the better. And so yeah, I really struggled with being the quote unquote cool girl with him. But obviously like we got through it and he stuck around. So but no, I talk about that a lot in my book, just kind of like the real side of trying to negotiate making big health overhauls when you share your life with someone or when you aspire to share your life with someone.
What about friendships? Was there, did you have
Yeah.
people that some were understanding, some weren't?
Yeah, I think, since I was in my mid-20s, fewer were understanding. Now in my current life, like I do not have this issue at all. Everyone understands. But I'd say like the vice detox was definitely hard for people.
Yeah.
And I again come to see it with like my clients in my program. Like it's always about your actual choices. Like people just project their own issues around sugar, alcohol, caffeine, all these things onto you. And it can be really icky, but it can also tell you about, the nature of relationship, if it's toxic or not. Or just, force yourself to have to say in the back of your head, like, that's not on me. Like that's on you.
Yeah. No, I get it though. Actually, I remember if someone told me they weren't drinking, I'd like make fun of them. I'd be like, "What?
Yeah.
Why aren't you drinking?" And then I've like tried to, I've got this real, coffee's a big vice for me. I love coffee, but I know it's not good for me. I'm about 7 months clean at the moment. I haven't had a coffee in
Oh,
7 months. So I'm really quite
good
proud
for
of myself, because
you.
if I have one, I have about five in a day.
Oh my God.
Yeah, terrible. But if someone ever said to me, "Oh, I've given up coffee," I'd be like, "Oh," and it would come from a place of me like wanting to do the same, but like almost being disappointed in myself. So I do get it, that it's a reflection of themselves, but yeah, it doesn't help when you're trying to make these changes.
Mm.
So in terms of like where you're at today and like with the people you work with, what would you say is like the number one blocker for people that you work with to stop them like making, I wouldn't say making a recovery, making improvements? Like, what would you say is the number one blocker when you see when you work with people?
I mean, I think it's stress for sure, is people
Really?
just, well, okay, I'd say it's two things. Well, because I, talk a lot about food and work around food. I'd say from a dietary point of view, it's focusing too much on the ingredients and not enough on how they're prepared, both from like an actual culinary standpoint, just this is dealing with gut stuff for the most part, our guts have a much easier time breaking down cooked foods, even easier like pureed foods. And, if you have a damaged gut or just, a sluggish digestive system, like those are going to be better choices for you than the raw salad that everyone tells you is the healthier choice. So I see a lot of mistakes being made there. And also as a result, people ruling out ingredients, and, just taking them out of their diet, which when in reality, they, could keep that diversity in and just prepare it in a different way. And then, the second flip side of that too is of course mental, and, having a mindful eating session. I mean, I am just as guilty as anyone of like shoveling food in my mouth in front of a computer or TV show. But I'd say more importantly, just, you know, with restrictive dieting, so many women especially have, disordered eating, just like an uncomfortable relationship with food to begin with. Once you start layering on all of these restrictive diets, elimination diets, as much as I'm a believer in them for, giving you information, they can add just another layer of fear around food. And so I think there are a lot of people just sitting down to meals who are, stressing about like, is this going to make me reactive? Am I going to get a stomach ache? Is this going to make me gain weight? I mean, that used to be the original thing that, you would be stressing about. But in the chronic illness community, I think there are just a lot of people who become afraid of food, as a trigger for symptoms. So I think just centering yourself and not just eating mindfully, but, kind of dipping into that rest and relax state before a meal is so important. And then, yeah, I would say just like as a number two area as a whole is just like stress and anxiety, and recognizing when that's a root cause. And instead of, again, looking at all the things that you've eaten in a day and for the dietary trigger, to maybe consider, that your mental state and what's happening in your home and work life could have an impact.
Definitely. Mindful eating's an interesting one. I went to this, I did this crazy detox thing in India. It's called Panchakarma. And
Mm-hmm.
every day you're like meant to eat like in silence or like on your own, and you're meant to chew so slowly. And I'm such a
Mm-hmm.
fast eater, which is terrible for me. I'm always doing it in front of the TV. And it's like I had 3 weeks of doing this every day. And by the end of it, I'd got used to it. And then within like a week of being back, I was back to normal. But it was an interesting way of doing. Do you talk a lot about people like chewing slowly? Is that
Yeah.
yeah?
Yeah. Well, chewing it all. It doesn't have to be slowly, just
Okay.
chewing. Yeah.
Well, I guess I do chew a little bit.
It slows you down, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
the idea is just to chew.
I mean, when I was younger, I mean, hopefully I eat slowly now, but like I was inhaling food. Yeah, a
Mm.
pizza at university, I'd be inhaling that after a big night of alcohol. In terms of like looking back at your story, like what would you say are, in what ways is your life like better now as a result, if assuming there are ways, like could you talk us through the positive things that you can take from your journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not an aspect that maybe many people identify with. You'll probably identify with it. But I do think like the huge silver lining has been my work and, being able to share resources with people who are struggling with similar issues and, being a voice of calm and inspirational in that way to people. I mean, I feel so lucky. And, every single year there is something that goes wrong with my health. There's like a new discovery or like, even like last year I had like horrible dental issues. Like it's always something. And I do get discouraged. I'm not completely immune, but I do luckily get to say in the back of my head, like, okay, like this is the new mission. This is like, the new area that I'm meant to, help people around. So for me, that's been such a nice silver lining.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think I guess I didn't acknowledge that, the fact that you were a chef before now and you've used that knowledge and then coupled with your experience to do what you're doing now. That's amazing. And I imagine, God, chef is, I remember it's such a stressful job. I remember I used to be a waiter and every chef I ever met looked like the most stressed out person ever.
Yeah. Luckily I never worked in a restaurant. That's like a whole other level of stress, but catering was pretty stressful too.
Yeah. Just final question. Like there'll be people listening to this now who are going through all kinds of chronic health issues, from Lyme disease, multiple sclerosis, Hashimoto's, but I guess mentally all going through something very similar. What advice would you give to someone like right now who's I guess at the depths of their chronic illness and they can't see a way out? What would you be advice to these guys to keep going?
I mean, I think just the whole process, unfortunately, is um, one step forward, two steps back. And that can be really hard to stomach in the moment. You can feel very, very lost and like you aren't getting anywhere, but you're slowly crawling up health mountain. It's the scenic route. Unfortunately, there's not a more direct route for a lot of us, but you will get there one day. And, you just have to be able to shoulder those setbacks because, as someone with a chronic illness, like they're always going to come up. And, it's just about finding the positivity in those and, not feeling like a failure or ashamed for that happening. Cause it's just part of the deal.
No, I love that. Thank you so much for that. That has definitely left an imprint on me and your story and just everything you've been through and just such a balanced view on things that it's refreshing for me, for someone who kind of tries to go a bit extreme at things. So thank you so much for coming on and telling your story. If people wanted to connect with you, I already mentioned your website, but what's the best way of people doing that?
Yeah, my website, Feed Me Phoebe, or Instagram at Phoebe Lapine. And you can find my books, SIBO Made Simple and The Wellness Project, hopefully wherever books are sold,
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been amazing. And I'm really excited to get this episode out to everyone.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.